be sharing my thoughts and opinions about an upcoming book I'm super excited about called How to Study Magic by Sarah Lyons. Full disclosure, I was sent this book by Running Press, thus allowing me to review it for you all early. My main focus and area of interest is, of course, ceremonial magic and Thelema, which is why I suspect they sent it to me in particular early to talk about and review. There's a section in this book on ceremonial magic, which also includes Thelema, so I want to focus on that in my review in particular, because there's a lot of fantastic reviews already starting to pop up, but that being my central interest and expertise, I want to definitely focus in on that, and I'll be doing that near the end of my video. So of course, despite being sent this book and being a personal fan of Sarah's, love following her online, I'll be doing an honest review of this book. So I know my viewers expect that from me, and of course, I do plan on honoring that. So I want to start this video with a quick introduction exploration of who I am, as well as who the author Sarah Lyons is. That will really get everyone up to speed and in the know. And then of course I'm going to jump right into my first impressions of this lovely book, what readers can expect to get from this book, how the book explores ceremonial magic and Thelema, and of course, to wrap up, I'll be addressing female representation in ceremonial magic. I really feel like that's a main focus of interest for her as well as myself, so of course I gotta touch on it, and then wrap up with my final thoughts and where to buy the book. Sarah Lyons is someone I really enjoyed following online. So I first learned about her from her book, Revolutionary Witchcraft. So Matt Warren has recommended that particular book in the past, and it's something I recommend as well to people. In that book, she explores magical activism, which as a topic, in my opinion, is more important than ever. Additionally, she is an organizer for the New York City Democratic Socialists of America, and I personally really admire that level of dedication to making the world a better place. So a lot of you might be your first time here, so you may have not heard of me before, but I'm Mavius Lynn, and I talk a lot about online and share my journey and my love and enthusiasm for magic, in particular occultism and ceremonial magic and Thelema. So I do identify as a Thelemite, meaning I accept the Book of the Law as a central and sacred holy text, and I do seek to do and follow my true will. And I'm just so excited to be talking about this book, especially talking about it early, and let's get right into it. So the first thing I noticed right away is this absolutely beautiful cover. It is a hardcover book, which is really lovely, and as you see on the cover, there's all kinds of little symbols, and I think you see a lot of the ones you'd expect to see. You have a triple moon up here, you have a dagger or athame, you have a cup, you have the wand. But the one thing that really stuck out to me is the Chaos Star as well as the Universal Hexagram. So you don't normally see Thelema really talked about in introductory materials like this, so I was really hopeful that Thelema was talked about, and I was pleasantly surprised it was. So then you see this absolutely gorgeous art in these beautiful pages. And oh, look at that. I noticed right away that the book was printed in 2 different color inks, so that is a really fancy addition to this book, which just makes it a beautiful book. And here's just a quick little peek at the contents. As you see, it covers a lot of basics you'd find, going right into chaos magic, spellbooks and grimoires, ceremonial magic, witchcraft, paganism, gods, and history, and where to go from here. So, just really fast, I could see, wow, ceremonial magic is in there, and then if you jump to those pages, you see Thelema is also a part of that ceremonial section, but it's quite thorough, and what it does cover, and the breadth of information it covers in this particular book. So this book is absolutely appropriate for beginners. This is really a book anyone could pick up and start reading and get things out of. You don't have to have any prior knowledge going into this, and she actually mentions this in the ceremonial magic section, where those texts tend to be a little bit more dense and hard to read through, and that's true, a lot of them are, but this is a beginner level book for a lot of different things, so I think this would be a fantastic choice for anyone who is unsure of what kind of magical path to pursue or even start on, or things they might be curious about, because she does mention a lot of things that you may read about and be like, oh, maybe this is it, and it may spark some interest. And I think it's okay, even if you have your path and your established journey that you're on, it's okay to pick up a book like this, for example, read through it, and get a sense for things outside of your tradition or path or journey, and start to explore them. So this is a great way to just jump into a bunch of different things and get a taste of them. And I think what is really cool about this particular book, and something that the readers would absolutely should expect, is Sarah's personality comes through this. And I do see a lot of complaints and online, and perhaps I think it's a valid complaint, that a lot of the magical texts out there are very dry. They are hard to approach because they're so dry. And if you're a fan of Sarah Lyons, and familiar with her work, and you do want a little bit more personality in what you're reading, you're gonna find it in this book. She really gives her perspective and her opinion across the board for a lot of different things, and that really gives it a lot of flavor and a lot of energy and character. So this is definitely a book with a character, and you can see her shining through this book, and I think that's really cool. And one of the coolest things about this book, aside from it just being a cool coverage of a lot of different magical subjects, is it's a woman talking about ceremonial magic, and we don't see that enough, in my opinion. And for the women who are talking about ceremonial magic, and Thelema in particular, they often don't have a platform to do so. So it's a special opportunity to hear a woman's voice about a lot of different magical topics in a book, and get that coverage and to get that perspective. So not only is it a fun read because of the character to it, but I think it's a very valuable read too, given that perspective and that context to read through this book. So I can definitely see people who perhaps already have an established idea about what they want, and they want a more fact-based approach, and they just want facts sort of beamed into their brain. This is not necessarily maybe going to be the book for you. Wanting facts beamed into your brain is completely valid. But this is, like I said, this book has more character and personality. And I think not only do we have Sarah's writing in this, but the art is just gorgeous. So you can really, I love the art. So I love the writing, I love the art. So it's a lot of fun, and it keeps the pace of this energy throughout the whole book. So I think that really covers what people could expect from this particular book in general. So here is a look at the really beautiful ceremonial magic art on that cover. I absolutely love it. I love the symmetry. The tahooties are gorgeous at the top there. I just absolutely adore that. And pretty early on, you see these fantastic little infographics with this awesome art once again. And if this is your first time seeing this information, this is going to be really helpful for you. So the Kabbalah section is pretty short, but it definitely goes into her opinion about things, and this is a really complicated topic that I won't even endeavor to try to get into myself on this video, but I will say that a lot of the historical scholars on Kabbalah, its origins, its evolution, they don't agree. So it's something a book like this couldn't get into, just for the length of information you need to get into that. But the thing I will mention that often gets erased from the discussion of ceremonial magic, and I don't see it mentioned here, which is a lot of Jewish people do practice ceremonial magic. A lot of Thelemites are also Kabbalists, are also Jewish people, so a word of caution, just to make sure the Jewish voices in this particular community, on both sides of the debate, or more than just two sides, but all sides of the debate, are being heard here. So, not everyone's opinion is going to be represented in this book, but that's okay. This is, a lot of her opinions, and, if you want a wider variety of opinions, of course you would have to read a little bit more in depth and consult a bunch of different sources, but especially if you're approaching this topic for the first time, at least this will give you a springboard to jump off on. So we get into the Rosicrucians here. Of course, I don't agree with the opinion, a few opinions in this book, but the one I definitely don't agree with is that the Rosicrucians are boring. A bit of flavor text there, a bit of fun. But that's okay. And, it does cover Helena Blavatsky, Freemasonry, and now the interesting thing about this particular book is we don't see Gerald Gardner mentioned in Freemasonry, but we do get to the section later on about Gerald Gardner. It mentions that he was in the Golden Dawn when we get to the Golden Dawn section in a bit, but that's inaccurate. Gerald Gardner was a Mason, but he was never in the Golden Dawn. So next we get into some Golden Dawn history here, and then we get into Aleister Crowley. Absolutely love that art. That is fantastic. Really made me smile. But for those who don't know, aren't familiar with this is based on a famous photograph of Crowley. He's not wearing a hat, actually. He's actually wearing a hood, and it's a hood of the Magical Order, the AA, which the book later gets into, and I'll be happy to talk about in this video as well. So, in this, I really love the discussion of Aleister Crowley's sexuality. It's a really solid conversation there. I also, when it gets into the Thelemic stuff, I really loved her conversation and discussion about true will. I think it's really solid. So, yeah, I definitely want to put that out there. So, and then I have just a bunch of notes to sort of get into a lot of stuff here. So the book does mention here that Yeats is a poet and an artist. Just a minor oversight. I think for most people it doesn't matter, but because this is my particular area of interest and expertise, I definitely want to mention it. And it's that W.B. Yeats was not actually an artist. I think you might be thinking of his dad, Jack Butler Yeats. He was an artist, though. So, I mean, yeah, I think most people aren't going to care about that, but I feel like I gotta mention it. So, moving on. Yeah. Again, I was so excited to see Thelema in this particular section. I just want to say how excited I was to see both the OTO as well as the AA mentioned in this particular book. I'm really excited about that because if people are interested in this particular topic, they'll know organizations to go to. Now, the OTO is a single organization, but the book doesn't mention this, of course, because that'd be way too much to get into, but the AA, after Aleister Crowley died, has actually sort of splintered into a giant tree of a bunch of different organizations, often referred to as AA lineages, and that's really highly debated. But yeah, if you are interested in the AA, at least you have a springboard from this particular book to get into. And, just to briefly mention, before you all get the book, the AA is the teaching order established by Aleister Crowley, and the OTO is more of a fraternal magical order, so a magical order fraternity. Just a few more things that I thought I would point out that I thought was interesting, aside from this awesome art. It mentions Babylon, who is a central, you could think of her as a goddess or a god form, as a goddess of love and war. That's a really interesting take on Babylon, and I would say not a conventional one at all. She would be a goddess of dissolution and destruction and sex. So, obviously with a lot of UPGs out there, people have a lot of different perspectives on Babylon, and that is a whole thing in and of itself, but I caution against taking her at face value as a goddess of love and war. So, just a little distinction there. And as we get into the OTO stuff, I do have a few things to say there. It starts to talk about a lot of history here involving the OTO, and I think that's great. That's not something you see every day, and, let's talk about this a little bit. So, it's a minor thing, but for people who might be interested in looking this information up, Carl Kellner, Carl is actually spelled with a C there. Who really cares ultimately, but, if anyone is interested in Googling that, you want to look him up with a C, and, it goes on to mention some famous people, like David Bowie being in the OTO. A fun fact, David Bowie actually never was in the OTO. He was never a member. He wanted to join the OTO, but Grady didn't let him because he was afraid Bowie would turn the OTO into a cult of personality. So I think it's pretty cool here down at the bottom of the page when talking about the OTO too. She gets into the different parts of the OTO. So the OTO is really broken up into 2 different sections. And, she mentions it being an alphabet soup. And I think for a lot of outsiders, that's a completely valid way to think about this and approach this organization. But for those who are interested, I'm just going to say it like this. So the EGC is involved in the church arm of the OTO, or the ecclesiastical arm, so they handle the central, primary, and public ritual of the OTO, which is the Gnostic Mass. I would not say that they handle all of the rituals or the running of the OTO. And the MMM is the initiatory portion of the OTO, so it's really 2 things under one trench coat. You have this public facing side of the OTO, the EGC and all of that stuff, where you get to interact with the priest, priestess, deacon, and so forth. And then you have the private rituals, the initiations and other such private rituals in the private portion of the OTO. And one thing, maybe I should do a whole video on this myself, but one thing I wish I understood about the OTO is you don't have to interact with both of those at the same time or at all. For example, if you just wanted to go to the Gnostic Mass and never take any initiations, you're absolutely able to do that. And you can participate in plenty of OTO activities, not just the Gnostic Mass, but a lot of bodies have basic solstice rituals, things like that, social events you could go to without being a member. But for the private initiations, you do have to be a member of the OTO, as well as other things like Noticon, which is the OTO convention every other year. So you would have to be a member for that as well. So here's the ceremonial magic section today, which is great with, fantastic journal prompts. So it's a hands-on book too. And you'll find these journal prompts and further activities throughout the entire book, not just ceremonial magic. I'm just focusing on this section in particular, but this is echoed throughout the entire book. It's very consistent in that regard. So I really like the ceremonial magic today portion because I think it opens the gates for people who are able to utilize a lot of these rituals and tools, really a toolkit, and feel empowered to do so without necessarily being a Thelemite or ceremonial magician. There's nothing saying you have to be a Thelemite, for example, to practice the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram or to explore some of these prompts. It's really, she says this over and over again, and it's really driven home. This is your path, and it's all about you. So if this speaks to you, pursue it. If it doesn't. And heck, if parts of this or parts of these organizations speak to you, pursue them. Although you can't, if you're going to do the AA, you're going to do the AA. It's not as much of a part of an organization, but certainly for the OTO, it's a little bit more flexible in terms of how you can interact with that organization and get out of it. There's plenty, like I said, plenty of activities you can do in the OTO without any pressure of joining or you joining at all, heck. So when it comes to ceremonial magic, she does mention ceremonial magicians and the community being stuck up, and I think that's actually a really important thing to mention. Yeah, obviously I don't consider myself and my friends stuck up, but I think there is a certain hostility towards women, especially in ceremonial magic, and I encounter this especially online. Some of the in-person ceremonial magic community, in my experience personally, has been very, very positive in person, a part of a lot of different organizations that do ceremonial magic. Not just AA and OTO. We have College of Thelema, we have Temple of the Silver Star by David Shoemaker. There's a lot of different Thelemic organizations out there. But that being said, online is definitely a very hostile, problematic community towards women in particular, and that's an issue. So I think, in general, I think that's sage advice for people interested in ceremonial magic, to sort of have tough skin and be ready for a little bit of pushback, especially for women, unfortunately, or practice in private, and no one can stop you or criticize you. But the one thing in particular that I don't know, I didn't agree with personally, but I'm sure other people would, but something I thought I would mention is that high magic, the purpose of high magic is to become a living god, and I disagree with that. For me personally, and for a lot of other magicians, high magic is done specifically for spiritual growth and advancement, and to become a more enlightened human being, to become a more empathetic, to become a more whole human being, to embrace that innermost spark of divinity within yourself. So as a Thelemite, I already consider myself a divine being and a god. I don't need to be one, and I certainly wouldn't pick up these ceremonial tools to become a god, ever, because I already view myself as one, and I pick up these tools personally as a way to become more complete, to become more spiritually rounded, and to advance myself spiritually. And before I get ahead of myself, back to the Karl Kellner stuff, I did mention his name, I spelled wrong, but a big one here is that Karl Kellner actually died in 1905, so this portion about him in 1912 doing all this stuff with the OTO, he couldn't have done that, he was dead. I think you're thinking of Theodore Royce, so in this particular section, just swap out Karl Kellner with Theodore Royce, and you're good to go. So, as I mentioned earlier, this book has a fantastic bunch of recommendations all throughout it. At the end of each section, there is a further reading section, which is super helpful. And if that wasn't good enough, she does you one better. At the very end of the book, there is a further reading list, which she does give you a couple extra bits of reading there, stuff to jump into it. I mean, obviously this is not an exhaustive list, and one should not expect that from an introductory book. I mean, obviously there could be some disagreement there about what you'd want to see in an introductory list, but I think in general it gives you some, and I think that's awesome. The one thing I will say, though, that I was rather, I wouldn't say disappointed, because, I mean, truthfully, it's just cool we even have a ceremonial magic section in this book, and the Thelema section, but I will say, I was disappointed. No women were represented as authors in ceremonial magic, and arguably, the history and conversations she presented around Thelema, its history in ceremonial magic, were very, very male-centric. And it's just not true that women were absent from Thelema in ceremonial magic. So, the one thing I will say is if I was going to include some women authors in this book or other recommendations, I can think of 3. And of course there's way more female authors than just these 3, but the first one being Dr. Manon Hedenborg White's book, Eloquent Blood. And this is just considered to be the go-to book for Babylon. And she does mention The Red Goddess by Peter Gray in this as a recommendation for Babylon. And this book, The Red Goddess, was one of the first books that came out on Babylon. And so it has you'll get a real sense of Peter Gray's opinion from that book. And it's one opinion and perspective on Babylon, but if you explore her book, it has a bunch of different opinions and perspectives. It goes really in depth, and you'll get a real sense of Babylon as a goddess in The Eloquent Blood. And I have heard the criticism that this book isn't approachable because some of it's more academic, but I think we need to start giving women the benefit of the doubt, because when they write too informally, it's not right, and when they write too formally, it's not right. But in my opinion, her book is incredible, and for this recommendation, I'll put this below. And a few other things worth mentioning, of course, is Phyllis Seckler, otherwise known as Soror Merrill. She was absolutely fundamental in Thelema as a religious movement, as well as her contributions to magic in general. She's written a bunch of different things, but 2 books come to mind in particular that are really important. Was her one book called The Thoth Tarot, Astrology and Other Selected Writings, and she has another book on Kabbalah, Magic, and Thelema. So she was the one who really carried the torch of the AA, and really, during the Magic revival, was there to continue breathing life into this living tradition. Not only does she have a very unique perspective on a lot of things, but she brings a big female presence and a woman's perspective to ceremonial magic, and Thelema in particular. And though Another one that comes to mind too is Nancy Wasserman. She wrote the Weiser Concise Guide to Yoga for Magic, and so a big part of Aleister Crowley's system is yoga, actually, and Nancy Wasserman does a great job diving into that. So if you're more interested in the yoga angle of Thelema, definitely check out her book. I think, like I said, Peter Gray's book is, one of the first to come out on Babylon, and you really get a sense of his opinion on there. But I think, it's worth mentioning that women are really important to ceremonial magic and Thelema in particular. So if you're interested in any of those recommendations, I'll put them in the description below. But most importantly, check out this awesome book! This book, you can explore from all different paths, traditions. You don't need any additional knowledge to dive into this book. It's a beautiful book. It'll look great on your bookshelf. And it's just an all-around great read. So yeah, if you have anyone in your life coming up on the holiday season who is looking for gifts, or you're like, oh, they're interested in magic but I don't know what to get, this book is great. Get that for them, get that for yourself. I definitely recommend it. I give it 2 thumbs up. And again, I think what was really special for me in particular was the bit about ceremonial magic and Thelema, and to see a woman talking about that, that's something that's really important to me, to get more diverse voices out there, specifically in ceremonial magic. Really cool. As always, I'm Lynn. Thank you so much for watching, and all the links and everything will be below in the description, so please check out the book, pre-order it, and check her out on social media if you don't already follow Sarah, and all of my stuff will be down below as well, so feel free to follow me and my channel. Awesome to have you join me, so thanks so much, and as always, I am the center of expression for the primal will to good, and so are you.